our learning objectives of today, we want to look at general awareness, responsibility, third-party certification, and it was interesting sort of following on from the discussion that we've just had about the role of the CPR and actually what other ways can we prove performance and demonstrate that we are managing our responsibilities well as well. So we'll talk about third-party certification a little bit further. We're going to talk about compliance. I mean, what regulations do I follow? How do I go about doing that? General fire door safety, like don't wedge your fire door open. And then we want to look at the sort of process behind it, like how do we actually manage the responsibility at every stage? Because as Ian said just before me, you know, there are a lot of different places in the supply chain where responsibility can be assigned. And actually, we need to think of it, it's the chain of responsibility and how we play our little role in it at whatever stage it is. But how do we ensure that we're passing over the right information to the next person in the chain to allow them to demonstrate their own responsibilities as well? So we'll look at the different stages and how can we manage that. And as I say, in a nutshell, we're talking about managing our risk and our liability here. So the thing about fire doors is that we're there pretty much in every building that we work, where we sleep, where we drop the kids off this morning, and they largely go unnoticed, apart from by people like me who just are obsessed with them. As I say, they largely go unnoticed, and they're part of a passive fire protection system of a building. So passive fire protection system is kind of, again, all the bits that no one really takes a lot of notice of. It's how I've built the floor, the walls, the ceilings, etc., smoke ventilation, all of these kind of things. But actually a fire door is very, very important within that system because it provides, it can be your barrier really, preventing or delaying the spread of fire and smoke around the building. So very basically, what is their purpose? Well, it's there to save lives and property. And of course, we don't often see fire doors doing that role. You know, no one's really, up to a few months ago, no one was really interested to talk to me that much about fire doors and what they really were meant to do. So within a building, and I expect that you may have covered this earlier in the presentation, but compartmentalisation, okay, it's a big long word, but it's actually very, very simple. Just means to keep that fire and smoke in one place in the building so that I can maintain the essential means of escape route out of the building, of course, if I have an evacuation plan. Now, in buildings, and I expect that you're all familiar with this term stay-put fire plan. So I might have a stay-put fire plan in quite a wide range of buildings. People sort of only assume it's tower blocks, but in actual fact, it's like any building where the occupant class, the occupant number, maybe the complexity of the design of the building is not going to actually allow me a safe and quick evacuation. So I have a stay-put fire plan. Now, in a stay-put fire plan, the idea is that people do, as it says on the tin, stay there until the fire and rescue services are able to bring the fire under control. So they're really seeking refuge within these safe compartments within their building. So of course, okay, obviously people are familiar with stay put and talking about tower blocks, but for just a second, let's think about maybe some other types of buildings where I'm going to have problems doing a quick evacuation. So a nursing home, for instance, a hospital, a high-rise recreational sort of hotel block, all these sort of things. So as you can see, it's wider than just what has been focused in the media recently. So as I say, we've got a role of refuge when we are talking about fire doors. We've got a role of keeping the means of escape route clear. And of course, that means of escape route out of the building is indeed the same access route that the emergency services are going to use to get into the building to fight the fire. So in actual fact, I want to keep that route, that protected route, clear as well for them. So, and just sort of coming back to one of your earlier comments when we talked about smoke as well, I'm going to talk quite a lot about smoke within my presentation because in actual fact, I'm here banging on about fire doors. 5% of the time, I really mean a fire and smoke control door. As we know, smoke will get you long before the fire usually does. I mean, people that actually burn in fires is quite low, but smoke inhalation can affect a wide number of people and a high number of people. So as I say, that's kind of secret life of a fire door. No one really thinks about that too much until it's too late. And in everyday terms, though, a door, it has to provide all of these other performance requirements. So it might be thermal, security, acoustics, got to look good, keep up with the Joneses next door sort of thing. Durability, all of these things. So in actual fact, think about it like this. I've got quite a lot of different performance characteristics that I need to bundle into that product. It's not just being able to say, oh, I've done it on a fire perspective. So really, this is when we're sort of getting into the nuts and bolts and being able to scrutinise the documentation that supports these type of products. Okay, so I'll just pause there. A quick show of hands again. How many of you may have heard of BWF Certifier? That's pretty good as well. Well done. Okay, big tick in the box. Okay, so BWF Certifier, it was set up over 20 years ago now, and it was set up because Trading Standards went and did a big fire door investigation. They went down to a load of merchants, went out to the warehouses, picked up fire doors off the pallets and took them to a furnace test centre and burnt them. And guess what? None of them hit anywhere near the 30-minute mark. There may be some of my colleagues in here who actually were, they were around at this time when this happened. So the fire door scheme was set up because in actual fact there were a number of manufacturers who were out there and they were doing it right. They were testing their product, they were running strict factory production control systems, etc., etc. And they realised that they were, well, essentially dealing in a life safety product, not too dissimilar from dealing in a child's car seat, a life-saving jacket, these sort of things. And the scheme was created in order for those people probably to kind of put their head above the parapet at the time as it was, but to go and promote best practice in the industry. So raise awareness levels, make sure people understood that these are life safety products, but also provide them with all of the information that so that they are able to keep that product working, i.e. fit for purpose, not just in the initial stages of manufacture, but of course throughout its life as well. In the last 20 years, the scheme has grown quite a lot. We have about 150 to 200 manufacturers in there now. We have associate suppliers, so these are all the ones that bring in raw materials. In our case, let's talk about fire door blanks, maybe, a term that you may be familiar with, but also all the other components, the glass, the glazing systems, the intumescent, etc., etc. Now, this image on this side of the screen here, I mean, this is quite a simplified image of what the fire door chain looks like, and don't get too worried about the detail of this because I'm not going to do any tests on it, but really sort of what to take from that is that actually the fire door supply chain is quite an intricate web. Products travel in all different directions, they travel in different guises, some of them as component parts, some of them as completely finished product that would get fitted into a building, and pretty much everything in between. And of course, it's not just a case of me being a fire door expert and going to speak to one of my fire door suppliers and say, I'm an expert, I know what I'm ordering, I want X, Y, and Z, and knowing pretty well, okay, I've got my specification right, happy days. The point is that fire doors are traded freely. As I said, we could go down to our local builder's merchant now. I don't have to show any qualification or any competence to go and buy those products. So we can't rely on the customer to be the font of all information in this. And actually, it's for the suppliers and the manufacturers to stand up to it. So a couple of things for you just before we move on. First one is this image at the bottom of the screen. I expect a lot of you have seen it. It's a fire door label. Don't get sort of too obsessed by that design of label because there are different ways that manufacturers of fire doors provide traceability, but this is one example. And the reason why I want to show you this is it's that crucial word, traceability. So in a snapshot, that label provides me with not just the manufacturer, so I can ring them when I get stuck on site because I don't know how to fit it properly, but it provides me with a direct link back to my fire certificate. So that's my recipe of what goes into that system of products and all of the limitations surrounding that product. And it will also let me know kind of what rating it is, but that's sort of by the by anyway. But really critically, it provides me with a unique traceable number. So let's sort of move forward 5 or 10 years and say that I'm on site now and I'm doing fire door inspections and I get to one of these doors that's got a label on the top of it and I want to know that in the last 5 or 10 years that door has been maintained exactly to the specification that it should have done. Of course, I can use that label to trace my way back to the original fire certificate and use that as my documentation to assist my ongoing inspections and kind of maintenance of the product as well. So very, very useful, but as I say, don't get too obsessed by just that label. There's quite a lot of labels that are out there, but the idea of traceability is kind of what I want you to take on board from this. Okay. So we're going to talk about third-party certification here. And again, I suppose there is an element in here of me teaching my grandmother how to suck eggs. But third-party certification, some people get a bit confused with it. So here are 3 scenarios that I commonly see fire doors being presented in the market. And they're not the limit of different scenarios I see them being presented, but they're probably some of the main ones. So first we have a self-declaration. And that's really me just standing here and saying, of course, Gov, it's a fire door. And they're like, yeah, that's Hannah. She's been making fire doors for 50 years. No one's ever really asked me, never tested it, never had to prove it. And, well, quite frankly, I've got away with it for that time. So self-declaration, and I see a few sort of raised eyebrows around the room of like, really, does that go on? Well, absolutely, that goes on. We could get on a well-known search engine right now, right here, right now, and pull up a lot of manufacturers who are, or suppliers who are making these marketing claims that they're selling fire doors. But when it comes to the crunch, they can't prove it to me. So from the perspective of the client or the next person in the supply chain, as I've talked about this quite a long supply chain, what I will be doing then is really taking all of that risk, and that's quite a lot of risk because people's lives depend on this, and I'm handing it over to the next person in the chain. That might be the end user, it might be the occupant in the building, it might be the installer, it might be the maintainer, all of these other people that I need to consider. So in actual fact, I'm not being very responsible when I'm handing that over that risk to them and expecting them to deal with it. So the second way that I see product being presented in the market is via a test report. And lots of people get very, very excited by just a test report. Now, test reports need to really be taken for what they are. It means that one day I took one product and I went to the test furnace and I tested my product. And I passed. Let's just say in this scenario I did pass, because you still get a report even if you fail. But the point about it is that's my snapshot test. It doesn't mean that I can go back to my factory tomorrow and continue to make product in exactly the same specification to ensure a consistent performance of product. So think about it, it's a snapshot, it's a one-off. You could even consider it might have been a lucky pass if I haven't got sort of frameworks in the background to control these things. So again, from the perspective of a customer or my next person down the supply chain, I'm passing them over quite a lot of risk with that. Now, I just want to give a very, very quick case study of the type of test reports that I often see being provided to me. And usually it's say, Hannah, have a look at this. Is it worth the paper it's written on, sort of thing. Now, there's a couple of things that you need to know about test reports. Number one, they're many, many pages long, and I expect that some of you are very familiar with scrutinising this type of documentation. Now, you can't just look at the front page, the nice shiny page that gives a big stamp and a big tick on it, sort of thing, nice star, lots of branding. Don't take that, because actually, of course, the detail with these things. And just as a kind of case study or as an example, I often see test reports come across my desk that are years out of date. And when I say years out of date, I'm talking 15, getting up for 2 decades out of date. So number one, sort of alarm bells are ringing, because in all of that time, the manufacturer's got to have somehow maintained this really strict production control so that they can still make that door as to how they were doing it when they were an apprentice, sort of thing. I mean, really? Is that, anyway, make your own decision on whether it would really happen or not. And so, number one, that they're very, very out of date. But number two, when you actually start to scrutinise them, and as I say, they are many, many pages long, these test reports, you actually find sometimes they don't really reflect the product which has been supplied at all. So I'm looking at a test report for a pass, but wait a second, that product's not the same one which is on the test report. So be very, very careful when you're dealing with test reports as well. And of course, as I say, there are elements of risk with this that I would then be passing over to my customer. So third-party certification, and I expect that many of you are sort of familiar that third-party certification, it's not just fire doors that it can apply to. It's products and it's also services as well. So I could be third-party certificated for installing a product as well. Now, I guess it sort of does what it says on the tin. I have that independent third party that's coming around and marking my homework. So they're not just the ones who originally tested my product, but they're the ones that come and they will audit my factory on a regular basis and make sure that I've got that strict factory production control system in place so that I can achieve that consistency of manufacture every time. So they don't just do that, they'll also come back and randomly select product from my supply chain or my production line and take it away and burn it at regular intervals, sort of thing. Now, if I fail one of those audit burn tests, then of course there's a big process that this clocks into of, worst case scenario, quarantining product which is from the market, using all of that traceability that I've talked to you about before to identify where it is, what the scale of my problem is, etc., etc. So third-party certification, really what you need to think of it is like layers of protection. Third-party certification, it's maybe not the holy grail, but it's probably the best that we've got at the moment. And for the end client or the next person in the chain, it's providing these extra layers of protection. So FPC, I've talked about it before. FPC is factory production control. And again, I'm sure that you're very familiar with some elements of what I'm going to talk about. But when it comes to fire doors, what does that really mean? So at the beginning, it means that I've got a really tight control of my raw materials. My specifications are all really documented as to what I expect my suppliers to bring me in raw material and component fashion. It means I will be doing goods inwards checks to make sure that the product which is supplied adds up to the specification that I'm expecting. I might be doing random testing on that myself to assure myself. But it's about having kind of controls at every layer of your business. So it's not just getting the goods in, it's the R&D department, it's the procurement department. You know, procurement always under a lot of pressure, save me a few quid here and there. Well, happy days, that's their job, and I'm not going to stand in the way of them doing their job. But there's quite a lot of due diligence that needs to be done in the background before they can make those buying decisions. So, as I say, factory production control is not just talking about what goes on in the factory when I'm actually putting two bits of wood together. It's about throughout the whole business, and it goes even towards, you know, the end when I'm shipping product to the customer and waving it by at the factory gates. That's not the end of it for me. There are records and documentation, handover of information to these people that I need to ensure that I'm doing as well. So that's really what gets audited by that third-party certificated company. Now, last week I was having a chat with Dave about fire door blanks. Now, sort of quick show of hands, are you familiar when I use this terminology of fire door blank? So lots of people explain it to me, a lump of timber, it's the base product, it's the leaf of the door, and I'm probably going to add loads of different bits to that to make it into an end product. Now, one thing to be kind of cautious of, and this is not just when I'm trading in fire door blanks, but so let's just say I've had my test report and I've removed the names for anonymity here, but let's say that this is my test report that comes across my desk to say, is this worth the paper that it's written on? So I scrutinise that and I say, well, you've got some of this product that's already arrived. Has it got any traceability on it that's going to link that test report back to the product that you've supplied me? Don't have any traceability with the product, don't have a stamp or a mark on each product. Now, when I dig a bit deeper, and particularly in the world of blanks and sort of when we're buying in these raw material component parts of fire doors, I can be looking at having a number of different suppliers, and they can be all over the shop. I might be 1 week trading with the Far East, second week in South America, and I know that some of my colleagues in the room, this is indeed their lives. You know, they spend a lot of time, do thousands of miles, and in actual fact, they'll be picking and choosing from different mills, all of them partners and signed up within the supply chain. But it's all down to where can I get the material at the right time, where can, you know, where have I got capacity, all of these different market drivers which actually feed into this. So the thing that I need to be really cautious of is how do I know that mill number one, let's say that was the one in the Far East, is going to make my product or supply me a product which is exactly spot on to number one, my specification that I'm expecting. But if I change over to mill 2 in the second week because mill 1 is too busy all of a sudden, how do I know they're going to maintain that all the way through? So it's about, particularly, I guess, in your world, like, again, those due diligence checks in the background that need to be in place to make sure that we are documenting specification, doing the goods inwards checks, but that we've got it really locked down. I can't just ring someone up and say, send me a bit of timber, as you well know. I mean, I expect you guys sometimes get phone calls like this, as we do at the BWF as well. They sometimes think that we're a woodyard. You know, we need to be absolutely spot on with what we're ordering and also what our expectations are from the supplier. Now, the reason why I've just popped in this lovely photo of this mill at the bottom, or this production facility, is that I was talking to a really large merchant, and they sent me the test report, and I'd sort of gone through this whole thing. Well, I don't know that test report is going to link back to my product. And I said, how do you know? Like, how do you audit your mills? How do you check that this is going to be okay? And he said, oh, well, they've sent me a photo. They've got a really nice painted floor in the factory. And I was like, right. And I think we all know, you know, we're all from manufacturing and production here, so we all know that a nice fresh coat of paint on the floor, you know, makes everything look just lovely. But the point is that I've got no idea whether my fire door product that I'm buying is actually coming out of that mill. So be very, very cautious. I mean, that was probably a bit of a naive thing coming from this guy, particularly given his job role. He should have known better. But that's the point. Like, don't be bamboozled by spurious claims sort of thing, and that rolls all the way through. And, you know, push back to your suppliers. You know, if they're dealing with you and they want to deal with you, then they should be able to provide this sort of, you know, the accompanying paperwork, the justifications, and all of these things in the background. Okay, so everyone okay so far? Yeah, okay. So what makes a fire door work? Now, I'm not going to read my way through this list, but what I want you to take on from this slide is that a fire door is a system of components. It's not just that door blank that I've talked about. It's the ironmongery, the intumescent seals, the installation, the frame, all the rest of it. And if I just get one of these details wrong, then that is my weakest point in the system, and your weakest point is obviously where it's going to go first, sort of thing. So it doesn't matter how good the rest of the system is. I might have just made one mistake by adding an eye viewer, let's say, like a tiny bit of metal, nothing massive, but actually that's going to have an enormous impact on fire performance. And lots of people as well with fire doors, I know that it sounds like, you're like, yeah, right, but actually they're very complex products, and to make them pass or fail tests, sometimes it's not a massive area away from each other sort of thing. It can be quite a close line. So as I say, take on from this that you've really got to have that whole system of components working hand in hand for it to work properly. What are we really looking at if we get it wrong? So initially, let's look at the danger to the occupants in the building, and of course to the emergency services, who we all ring in an emergency and expect them to come to our aid. Now, if you have got a legal responsibility for fire doors or fire safety or products, and again, in this discussion, that's quite a wide range of different people in the stakeholder chain. You can be prosecuted, that could be a fine, and it can be imprisonment. And I expect that, as Ian knows, corporate manslaughter and things like this, they're kind of buzzwords at the moment. And in actual fact, these are very real examples of where we would start to see imprisonment or jail sentences coming with these sort of things. From an insurance perspective, if your insurance relies on the fact that you've kept your fire safety in your building up to scratch, and of course this goes back right down the chain, as Ian has said before, of whose responsibility it was to get that right. If you haven't done that, your insurance may not stick, and we know that insurance companies love an excuse not to pay out. And of course, I always think that number 5 on this list, your risk to reputation. If you're worrying about number 1 to 4, I mean, number 5, I guess you've got a lot of time on your hands probably to think about number 5. But for the people in this room, we're working for big organisations. They've got reputations that they need to uphold. So I think we do need to consider the risk to reputation as well if we're not doing things properly. Again, sort of to quickly go over this, talking about a chain of responsibility, it's not so simple as just saying, it was the manufacturer, because I could argue, well, my product's not been installed properly, and the installer could say, well, my product wasn't maintained properly. So as you can see, you can start to actually assign responsibility to quite a few different areas along that supply chain. Now, as I say, probably the thing to take on from this slide is that if I'm working in this area, in this sector, and I'm trading in what is essentially a life safety product, I need to make sure that that product has got everything with it so that I can pass it over to the next person in the chain and enable them to manage their responsibility as well. Throughout this presentation, you'll hear me refer to what I call compatible products. And from the perspective of sort of explaining what I mean by that, compatible, I mean that it's written on the fire door certificate, so that I've got that third party who's telling me that I can use it. So again, think of fire doors as systems of components. All my compatible components are my glazing, my ironmongery, my frame, everything that's gone into that. Now, if I break one of those components by just substituting one for something that's not compatible, number one, I've broken the certification, so I've got no guarantees, but I actually don't know that that's going to work. So all of a sudden, we're not just talking about, this bit of paperwork glitch in the background. We're actually talking like, I don't know that that's going to work. And in the case of fire door, I don't know that it's going to last for 30 minutes or 60 minutes, whatever I have sold it to do. Okay, so the next few slides, we're going to look into different elements of fire doors. So fire door leaf, obviously, essential to making a fire door, but it's not the only thing that you need to consider. Now, fire door leaves, and interchange that word with blanks, particularly for some of you who are in this presentation. There is a very wide range of product on the market, finished fire doors and fire door blanks. And in actual fact, many, many of them already voluntarily undertake third-party certification. So really, in my world, I kind of come across fewer and fewer incidences where there's really ever an excuse to step outside of third-party certification. Timber fire doors, they've been at it for decades now, sort of thing. So there's a massive pool of product which is out there, good quality product, stuff that we can, we've got that traceability so we can do our own due diligence checks in the background. One of the important points, though, that you do need to pick up about fire doors is it's not like cut and paste and chop and choose as you see fit. There are quite strict limitations to how I can use particular products. So again, back to my slide when I'm talking about buying in from mill one week and next week talking to mill 2 about the same product. I can't just assume that I can, as I say, use them. There may be size limitations. There may be limitations regarding the type of ironmongery that I can fit to them, the configuration, whether I put them as a single or a double door, things like this. So again, it's like linking our way back to that original fire door test certificate, even if we're just trading in one element of the raw material or component which is coming in, to make sure that we're still within those strict limitations and we can maintain certification. So frames and linings, and I know that some of you in this room may provide like profiled timber material that would go into these kind of elements, and in fact in a number of other guises as well, actually. But really important to note, again, back to that thing that these are systems of products. I need to be very careful about the material that I'm using. It needs to be exact specification as to what's written on the fire test report. Again, density, quality, all of these things, again, should be picked up in the specification and the goods inwards checks. But for simplification, this is, of course, all written on the test certificate as well, and it's a really useful way to be able to do those checks. Fire door rating. So if I've tested it under the British standards, it's an FD 30 for 30 minutes, FD 60 for 60 minutes. Most of the time we come across FD 30, 60 or 90 or E30, 60, 90. If we go to some specialist places, and give it a good example is like an operating theatre, I actually find fire doors which are kind of really like massive and really, really thick. Of course, you know, that's the kind of building where I've got a real stay-put fire plan. If I'm there doing an operation in that operating theatre and the hospital is burning down around my ears, then I am expected to stay there and finish that operation. So all of it, you know, that's probably not the type of product that we could wander into our local merchant and pick up. If I've tested the British standards, it's known as FD30 or FD whatever. If I've tested it to the European standards, I'll know it as an E30, E60. And again, from your earlier conversations regarding cladding and things like this, I know that you'll all be quite familiar with this sort of thing. And getting back to the point about smoke control as well. So when it comes to fire doors, I mean, fire doors are there to delay the spread of cold smoke around a building, and smoke travels much faster than fire. In just a few minutes, it can cause dizziness, disorientation, all of these kind of things. It becomes very hard to make an escape if you become overcome by smoke. But when we're talking about actually specifying and buying and procuring fire doors, the only thing that tells me that I want smoke with that is that little S after its rating. So again, I'm just pointing out as a point of small detail. Again, lots of people sort of don't pick up on it. And just taking on kind of learning from what our colleagues were talking about in the question and answer session, it was that thing about if I know that so if someone comes to me and they say, oh, Hannah, I'd give us 10 fire doors, and I'm like, oh yeah, fine, but like, I know that they're getting used in a residential care home, so I know really that they need to be smoke control as well. And actually sort of one of the best practice things that we do when we're talking to our merchant customers that sell fire doors through their approved fire door centre is sort of a list of prompt questions that they should be asking their client to be able to lock down what the client really wants. Because we can't expect the client to be the expert anymore. You know, things are a changing sort of thing. Intumescent and smoke seals, I expect that you've come across these, and whenever you're walking around and looking at fire doors, you can really clearly see these in place. You find them in the frame or in the edge of the door, different specifications, different materials, they do different things. Glazed apertures, I mean, even as we look around, there's some glazing in these ones at the back, but glazed apertures, they're used for a number of reasons, to bring natural light in, safety, all of these kind of things, design, aesthetics and things. Again, think of these as a system of components. So if you've got clients who are buying blanks, fire door blanks or leaves, and they are cutting apertures in them, there needs to be that real clear link to make sure that they are provided with the information to know the limitations of that glazed aperture and the specifications of that glazed aperture as well. Like glazed apertures in fire doors are actually quite hard to get them to pass the test. The tolerances are really tight, I can't muck around when I'm doing it. And even like a tiniest detail, for instance, the angle that I've put in the fixings in the beads can have an effect on my fire performance. So again, tiny little details that probably, unless you sort of do fire doors every day, you might not be aware of, so worth checking. And ironmongery. So again, if I was a merchant and I'm supplying not just the door blank, but possibly an ironmongery suite to accompany it as well, again, I can't just chop and choose, but the recipe of what I can use is on the certificate. And a tiny detail, but again, an essential one. We've talked about intumescent seals around the side of the doors. So intumescent is a material which expands when it gets hot. As I say, there's different materials, they expand at different rates, different temperatures and all the rest of it, do different things. But on a fire door, where I've got a big lump of metal like a hinge or a lock or anything like this, of course, what happens to a big lump of metal in a fire? Well, it gets very hot. These elements are often provided with intumescent protection in the way of pads or like little jackets that go around them, and they're there to protect that element and protect the timber which is surrounding that component. We commonly, when inspecting and things like this, we see these tiny elements. No one realised what they were, and they've usually sort of chucked them in the bin and things like that. So again, when you're supplying them, it's really making it crystal clear to your client that they get the message. Okay. So fire door regulations, we've sort of talked about, fire doors general, and people, as I say, they don't really think about them until it's too late and everyone's starting to point fingers in different directions and say, well, why haven't these worked? Again, talking about Consumer Rights Act, but the one that I want to really pick up on in here is products should be fit for purpose. So in the sense of fire doors, what does fit for purpose really mean? So yes, proof of performance, so yes, I tested it to start with. Controlled quality, i.e. I've got a factory production control system in place that might be underwritten by an independent third party to give us those extra levels of assurance. Putting the due diligence in the supply chain to make sure that what I'm buying in is as my supplier is stating it should be, and also meeting the claims I'm making to my client as well about the performance of a product. Traceability is obviously one of the things that really underpins this. The compatible components, selling it with compatible components, or selling it to the client with the information that they need to know. So it's no good me selling a lump of timber and saying, oh, yeah, I sell these as a fire door blank on a Monday, but sometimes, like on a Tuesday, someone like rings me up and says, oh, I need like a load of timber just for like this one job, let's say it's signage, so nothing to do with fire. And actually that product, I could use it for those as well. I can't really pick and choose and say, well, I only sell them as a fire door blank on a Monday, and actually I'm prepared to sell them on a Tuesday as other products sort of thing. So if I'm selling it as a fire door blank, I need to sell it in a way that it's got all of the information that the next person in the chain needs to know to make that product fit for purpose. Because as a fire door blank, it's not a door yet. It needs all the hinges, it needs the frame to make it into a door. But in a way, it's about being responsible and allowing the next person in the chain access to that information as well. It's not just thinking about your next person in the supply chain, thinking about the end user in the supply chain who's actually going to have to manage and maintain the products throughout their lifespan as well. And just kind of a bit of an interesting one when we're talking particularly about the merchant sector. If we've got colleagues in branches or in the office sales, sales office, sorry, is what I'm trying to say. And they're actually talking to the customer, and then they're taking a role where they are providing expert advice to that customer. So if I need to make sure that my employees have got their training up to date, I've got training records, all of these kind of things to show that, yes, we are selling it in a responsible manner. And just a little point about merchants. So obviously I don't like to brag, but I've been in the timber industry since I left school, which is quite a long time now, Dave. Now, kind of when I was an apprentice and things like that, I would go to the timber yard and it would be tradespeople there. Yeah, it would be my peers, people who had been in the business decades, loads of experience. Of course they knew what they were doing. But of course, the role of the merchant has really changed now, and we drive past and we see open to the trade and public. Again, the customer has become much more empowered. Really, product is at the end of a click of a button on a online merchant shop sort of thing. So all of a sudden we need to actually think about this and ensure that the practices that we've got in place in our organisations, particularly in it, arming our customers with suitable information so that they can in turn make that product fit for purpose. Sorry, I've talked about the evolving customer as well. What's quite interesting, and I just sort of add this in now, is that the demographic of people that are making the buying decisions is a lot younger. Again, access to information is there at the click of a button, so lots of people are a lot more empowered. And, we need to up our game as well, so to make sure that from the merchant sector we can service that. So that was kind of just regs and responsibility and things like that. But just a bit on the approved documents. So everyone knows the building regulations. Lots of people get confused with the building regulations and these images here. These are the approved documents, and approved documents are just guidance. The actual building regulation to do with fire is basically, I will not create buildings that catch on fire sort of thing. It's very, it's a one-liner, but the crux of the information is in these documents here. I expect you all know that at the moment there's a consultation out about approved document B, which is the one that deals with fire. But I've just circled these, and to be honest with you, there are actually a few more that get added to this as well. Because I wanted to highlight to you sort of all of those performance characteristics that I need to bundle into a fire door. So again, it's not just making sure that I hit volume 1 and 2 of approved document B, but that I get E for acoustics, and I get F for thermal, and ventilation for ventilation, K for sort of protection from impact and falling when I think about stairwell fire doors and things like this, L for thermal, M, particularly important one, accessibility for all users to buildings. And then I always like to give Regulation 7 at the end a little mention, because not many, it's already been brought up today, but in actual fact, not many people know about Regulation 7. And Regulation 7 talks all about quality of materials and workmanship as well. So again, sort of it's within that document where they talk about different ways that you can prove performance of your product. And the CPR, as we know, is mentioned in there, but as is third-party certification, because remember, these are guidance documents. It's not the only way to do something. And just to point something out also as well about the building regulations and guidance documents, they are the minimum standards that you have to achieve. Now, some people will, in particular projects and things like that, they take an element of those, but actually they're building additional layers of protection on top of those. So although, to give an example, in approved document B, it might tell me that I need a fire door in X location and Y location, I might decide on my project, actually I've got a particularly vulnerable profile of user, or I've got something particularly precious. So actually I'm upping what the regulation is asking me to do. So that's our lowest minimum standards. Again, this slide, I'm not going to give you a test on any of these, because I expect I would trip myself up with them. But really what I just wanted to illustrate is that there's a really wide range of different standards, guidance documents, and all of these kind of things that feed into how we research and develop our product, how we test it, how we certificate it, and how we manage it as well. If anyone wants any more information about that, then give me a ring afterwards, and obviously I'll do my homework before I answer the question. And Regulation 38, also really important to mention, and particularly when we're dealing in life safety products, and probably actually you can probably sort of draw relevance to with fire doors to our earlier conversations when we're talking about cladding and external envelope systems and things like this. Regulation 38 is all about me handing over enough information to the end user to enable them to manage that safety product throughout its lifespan. So in terms of fire doors, the type of information that I would be looking to hand over to them is care and maintenance instructions, maybe probably, if not a copy of the certificate, certainly highlighting to them that the certificate can be freely downloaded and it's always accessible to go and check that specification. And of course, the labelling and the traceability that we talked about earlier does provide that additional levels. I would love to be walking into every building where I do fire door inspection and finding brilliantly labelled fire doors wherever I go. But as you can imagine, this is not the reality of what we deal with at the moment. So there are sort of traceability it makes my job a lot easier, or it makes the person who's managing the building, makes their job a lot easier. They can make sure that they're using compatible products. They can even use those documents to check the installation was done correctly, even if that was 10 years ago. So really, really useful, particularly when we're dealing in sort of a historic basis. And just probably worth giving a mention to the regulatory reform order. So this was a really massive bit of legislation, nearly 12 years ago, it sort of properly came in. And actually, I don't know, it seems that there's quite a lot of interpretation of this document that still goes on, like particular scenarios that aren't really listed in it. Now, the RRO removed, I think it was like 75 or 80 different pieces of fire legislation. So as you can see, it's quite a big document. But this is the one that's really key, particularly if you are in a building where you have the role of a responsible person or a competent person as well. This is the document that names a responsible person, which, as it says on the tin, you are the one who is responsible for fire safety, and unfortunately it would be you standing up and telling and justifying your decisions if it came to the crunch. Now, of course, really, I always actually think it's wrong to call them a responsible person, because when we start looking at organisations that might own and manage a vast building stock, like let's say a council, it's likely that I'm actually going to have quite a few responsible people in there, and I expect a discussion with Ian. It might be quite a few hours worth of discussion. Sometimes that's the intricacies of this piece of legislation, is really picking out who is the responsible person. And as this, my personal experience is, as this legislation beds itself in, or as this regulation beds itself in, it's sort of people are understanding more and more who is the responsible person. But there have been cases where enforcement hasn't been able to prosecute because they actually got to us, they couldn't decide who was the responsible person. So, as I say, I thought it was worth highlighting, and that's a key piece of legislation to bear in mind. So how do we get it right, and how do we know that we are getting it right? So it really starts right at the beginning, the design and specification. So although really on this slide I'm talking about making sure that Mrs. Jones has decided she wants a pink cat flap in her fire door or whatever, let's talk about it from the merchant perspective here. So design and specification. If I'm going out and sourcing raw materials from any of our colleagues in the room or further afield even, I need to make sure that I've got it documented exactly what I want. What performance characteristics do I need? What levels of performance? What proof of that performance am I going to want from my supplier? And I need to have that all done before I even start ringing around and seeing who's got what in stock and how much they're going to sell it to me for, sort of thing. So, and again, that sort of, well, I'm sure you guys all know, or guys and girls, know that, you know, if we can sort these problems out earlier on, it will save us a lot of money on remedials later on when we have to go back and fix it. Stick to the specification, so it's critical. So not just in all of the system of components, those components that I've talked about that have to work hand in hand, even looking at the raw material components. So if we were to take the frame element, so looking and making sure that I'm using the right density, the right species of timber, the right moisture content, all of those kind of details, the stuff that we're interested in is listed on your certificate as well. So when I say stick to this spec, I'm really talking about sticking to the certificate. I mean, kind of when it comes to that, it seems very, very easy to do. Procurement, we kind of touched upon it later on, and as I say, procurement, it's often a difficult place to be because you are expected, obviously, to do fantastic deals, bring in innovations of products and all these kind of things when you work or when you're in charge of procurement. And this is not to say that you can't do those jobs, but it's about having that due diligence and the checks in the background to make sure that you're not breaking specification. Well, specific responsibilities, very, very quickly, it's all about specification. It's about having checks and balances in place in order to pick up where you might have a problem arising. So to give a good example is if I've ordered a particular product, a particular fire door blank, and I want it to a specification, that process of undertaking, say, goods inwards checks against what I'm actually being delivered, you know, random checks, that's again a sort of checks and balances that I'm putting in to avoid and pick up anywhere where we may have some issues. Tolerances and specification, don't sort of automatically think, oh, my timber's been left on the docks for quite a few weeks, it's a bit wetter than I thought I wanted it. Is that going to be a problem? Well, you better check because it may be a problem. So as I say, small sort of details, traceability clearly, and using compatible materials or component substitution. Don't do it without checking. We've talked about handover of documentation, again leading back to the labelling and traceability of products. And of course, just to say that everything that I've talked about is no good without having a robust regime of inspection and maintenance within buildings as well. And probably for quite a lot of my colleagues in the room, that's quite far removed from your daily roles, but it's really important to think about that we're supplying these products with enough information to allow our customer to do that.